Joining us now is Matt Duss, former foreign policy advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, who recently co-authored a fantastic piece in the New Republic titled "A Better Biden Doctrine." 2 years in, how well has Biden kept his 2020 promises on foreign policy? It's an excellent piece. I highly recommend everyone read it, but I also highly recommend you stick around for this great interview featuring Matt Duss. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to come speak with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Anna.
I really enjoyed your piece because I think it was such a great, comprehensive, almost like a report card on how the Biden administration has performed foreign policy wise. And it really is a mixed bag. I think there are areas where I think the Biden administration has actually significantly improved upon what we experienced under Obama's administration. But there are some weak spots. So before I get to the weak spots, before we even get to Ukraine and all of that, I do want to just kind of ask you, where do you think Biden has actually done well and improved from the Obama era?
Right, and I think the approach that my co-author Stephen Wertheim and I took here was to not talk about what do we think the ideal, not to measure the Biden administration and against what we think would be kind of the progressive ideal. It was to hold them to commitments and goals that they themselves laid out on the campaign trail, in the Democratic Party platform in 2020, and see how all that's going. And I think one of the things that is really significant, and we mentioned this in the piece, is first of all, there has been a break from the era of neoliberalism. I think if you look at Biden's speech to Congress back, I think it was April 2021, that was really a remarkable speech because it essentially said, the old Washington consensus is over. The American government, the US government will now be spending money to take care of the American people. We're going to be investing in our communities. The old idea that you just cut taxes and that promotes growth and everyone benefits. Like a lot of these old economic arguments are over. And I think that's really important because that's a shift that we did not see from Obama. A lot of the old economic logic, both domestically and globally, sort of held under Obama. And so I think that is kind of one of the key underpinnings of the Biden administration's approach, is whether it comes to trade, whether it comes to the CHIPS Act or the IRA. A few other things I would mention. There's at least. Go ahead. Sorry
to interrupt you, but I have I don't know if it's a provocative question in response to what you just said.
We like those. Yes.
But I am curious, I've heard Senator Sanders say on multiple occasions that he's genuinely friends with Biden. I'm wondering how much of an influence Senator Sanders has had on President Biden on the issue of neoliberalism.
I mean, it's a good question, and I think it's, yes, he does have a relationship going back many years with Joe Biden from their time in Congress and their together, and also as the second place finisher in the 2020 Democratic primary. I think the Biden team made a very good faith effort in reaching out to the Sanders team, to me personally, and to some of my colleagues who worked on the Sanders campaign and engaged with us. But I think it's beyond just a personal relationship. Bernie Sanders he is part of a movement. I mean, his slogan in 2020 was "Not me, us," and I think that is very much what he continues to represent in the party, in the country, and also when he talks to Biden. So he can speak for a number of values and policies and principles. But I think it is to Joe Biden's credit and to his team's credit and his administration's credit that they recognize that this is an increasingly influential and well mobilized and well organized force within the Democratic Party. I mean, the progressive movement on a whole range of issues. And they have engaged with it and considered their ideas and brought some of them on board, not all of them. But I think you can clearly look at the platform from 2020 and clearly look at the way they talked about a lot of these issues since then, and chart the influence of the progressive movement.
One of the things that Biden has done, and it really hasn't gotten much attention, I think by design, I think the Biden administration wants this, is the rollback of the expanded drone war that we saw both under the Obama administration and the Trump administration. Now, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's a reason why the Biden administration is avoiding any type of public bragging about that. And it might be because there's this fear that Republicans will give them a tough time.
Right, I think, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, let's just draw back. I think one of the main kind of the approach to foreign policy from the Biden administration generally is they want to spend as little time as necessary fighting about foreign policy, and that does make some sense. They want to focus on delivering, goods for the American people. They've got other priorities. Foreign policy certainly needs to be one. But as the point we make in the piece is, while yes, we recognize there have been a number of steps the administration has taken that are very good on the war on terror, like the diminishing of drone strikes is a very important one. And again, going back to what I said earlier about the influence of the progressive movement on this administration, ending forever wars is an agenda item that the progressive movement generated, that Senator Sanders adopted along with a number of other candidates in the 2020 primary, and that the Biden administration took on board. But the downside of doing these things without fanfare, which they're doing for exactly the reasons you said, because they don't want to have to put up a target that could attract, attacks from right-wing demagogues in all the usual ways we know, is, if you want to really change the consensus, if you want to create a new and durable consensus around the use of force, around the use of military violence, you really do need to get into a public debate and explain your position. And get political buy-in, not just from the Congress, but from the American people. And so I think that is one of the downsides for doing these things without fanfare. The other downside is that you do, if you're not really changing these things in legislation, you're basically leaving these tools on the table for future and potentially much worse administrations.
Absolutely, that's such a good point. I want to move on to Ukraine, because this is an issue that I'm trying to figure out where I stand, because when the war began, I was 100% behind helping Ukraine defend itself, especially since the United States had made security commitments to Ukraine after Ukraine had given up its nuclear weapons in the 1990s. But now I'm starting to feel a little uneasy with how much military aid is getting funneled to that effort. I'm also feeling a little uneasy about how Ukraine is feeling more comfortable with, some of these offensive attacks, because it could potentially escalate the war with a nuclear power, and I don't think that would be a good thing. As a foreign policy expert, where do you stand on the issue?
Yeah, no, I think the questions and concerns you raise are totally valid and legitimate, and I share some of them. I think, my position on this, I wrote a piece in the New Republic last June about why I think supporting the defense of Ukraine is important for the left. I got some agreement, I got some disagreement on that, but again, I appreciate all of it, because I do think this is a really important kind of discussion about principles to have for the left to have. My own view is, I think the Biden administration has set out three really important, goals in what they want to achieve in supporting Ukraine. One is not to be drawn into a US-Russia war or a NATO-Russia war, not to involve US troops. President Biden took US troops off the table very early on, quite rightly. The second is to, assist Ukraine in defending its own territorial sovereignty. The third is to create a strategic defeat for Russia because of its invasion of another sovereign state. I think people can have really legitimate questions about, okay, how does this end? I have those questions myself. I think the administration's case, as they have said various times in public, is they want to continue to support Ukraine in retaking territory, but also to put Ukraine in the best possible position for negotiations when those negotiations become possible. And I am among those who believe that we need to continue to seek, options for a diplomatic resolution to this. But, as I see it, there is no evidence as yet that Vladimir Putin is interested in that option. He is, as far as I can see, is interested in continuing to prosecute this war. But still, I think we should continue to look for those options and those opportunities. I think the Biden administration is looking for those opportunities. We have, outreach from the administration and contacts and conversations at various levels between the U.S. and Russia, between the U.S. Secretary of Defense and the Russian Defense Minister. Late last year, we saw the public, it was publicized that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had been in contact with close advisors to Putin to identify any possible opportunity to end this. But again, to repeat myself, I think as yet, Putin doesn't seem to be interested in that.
When it comes to peace negotiations, one thing that I've noticed is as the United States has been more and more willing to provide military aid to Ukraine, we've been hearing less and less from Volodymyr Zelensky that he is willing to engage in peace negotiations himself. Now, he might be willing to engage. And obviously the peace negotiations involve some compromise, including potentially giving up some regions of Ukraine to Russia. Do you at all feel that the military aid might be compromising Zelensky's willingness to compromise and potentially engage in those negotiations? I think you're right about Putin, but I am also worried about what our aid could potentially do, some unintended consequences of that aid when it comes to Zelensky.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, my own view, Zelensky, my feeling is that if Zelensky felt that he could end this war and end the killing of Ukrainians in a way that was sustainable, that would not simply lead to future conflict, he would be interested. But I also think that Zelensky, and again, I've not spoken to him, so I don't want to speak out of my experience here. But we also have to understand politically what we have seen, the actions that Russian forces have taken in these cities that they have occupied and that have been taken back, the atrocities that have been carried out. I don't need to go into details here. You've seen them. Your viewers have probably seen them. Just these are outrageous, and so for Zelensky as the president of Ukraine to be talking about seeking peace is politically difficult. Now, I think there are conversations that are going on behind the scenes all the time between the United States and Ukraine to look for these opportunities. But again, I would put the onus on it where I think it belongs, which is on Russian President Vladimir Putin, who started this war and is the one who could potentially end it.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.